As we continue in this Pentecost season, reading the Gospel of Luke, we see Jesus now traveling with his disciples, and he is telling stories. He knows that they're confused, that sometimes the people who are coming to him aren't quite sure exactly who he is, what they should believe, how they should believe. And so he tells stories to help them understand. Parables, we call them. Sometimes we wonder, why didn't Jesus just get up and give a lecture? This is what it is, here's what it is, lay it out, and that would be it. But he told stories. I suspect that one of the reasons he told stories was that we tend to remember stories better than we remember a lecture. As one who spent a few years lecturing, I know that's true. I think sometimes he told stories also because when you hear a story, sometimes you can sort of find yourself in it. One of the characters may have a couple of things about them that are similar to you. Okay, I get it. Often when he told the stories, the people in the stories were not necessarily the holy folks. They were the simple folks. They were sometimes kind of scoundrels and rascals, weren't they? Remember a couple of weeks ago we saw the story about the manager of the rich man's property and how he was stealing from the rich man? And then to make things better for himself, he kind of did a finagle the deal at the end of it. Not a very nice character, but suddenly Jesus said, yeah, he can teach us something. We can learn from him. Kind of interesting. Even last week, you may remember that story that he told. It was about the judge and the woman. The judge was a crook. He was corrupt. Remember what it said in the story? That he listened to God and paid no attention to anyone else. And the woman, she was stubborn. And yet, he holds them up in the story. I think sometimes he told those kinds of stories to say, folks, I know you live in a world that isn't perfect. There are people out there who aren't that great, but we can learn from each other. We can grow together if we pay attention and open our hearts. And in the story that he tells this week, it's similar to that. Not the greatest characters in the world, but there's something we can learn from them if we listen. We read in chapter 18, starting with verse 9, it says, Jesus also told this parable to some of those who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. And he said, 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thusly, "O God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of my income." But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, "Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, this man went down to the home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. This is the word of the Lord. Well, there's Jesus beating up on the Pharisees again, it seems, isn't it? But I want to clarify something. The Pharisees were not the target. The Pharisees were good and decent people. In Jesus' time, the Jews were sort of divided up into different sort of almost denominations. It's not a good parallel, but it's somewhat similar to us. We have Christians who are Orthodox, we have Christians who are Roman Catholics, we have Christians who are Protestant, and they had Jews who were Pharisees, and some were Sadducees, and some were Zealots, and they had slightly different ways of approaching God. And of all the Jews, the Pharisees were the most pious. They were the ones who kept the law. They were the ones who kept the rituals. They were the ones who went to temple. They were the ones who supported the temple. You see, they were good people, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there were some few of them who thought that just by following the rules and just by following all the rituals, it made them better than others. And there were some, like the Pharisee in our story, who loved to go to temple, not so much to worship God, but to make sure that everybody saw them go to temple. And I'm sure when the offering plate came around, Jesus even told a parable about this at one point. When the offering plate came around, he made a fairly large show of pulling out his wallet and his wad of bills and saying, "Here you go." They were shekels. I know they were shekels. I understand that. Cut me a little bit of slack. But yes, he would take the shekels up, and I'm sure he made sure that they made a lot of noise when he dropped them in the plate, right? Now, the purpose of all those rules and rituals were really to gain righteousness. Righteousness, which means being right with God. But there are some people who perverted it and made it into not righteousness, but self-righteousness. I'm going to show just how pious I really am. I'm not like you. I will someday let you off the hook, okay? Sorry. But there are some who would use that as a way of saying, I'm better than everyone else because look at what I do. Self-righteousness. We all have a little bit of that. Come on, fess up. We all have some of that, right? My mother used to have a phrase, and she meant it in the best and most loving way. She would see someone who was either hurting or someone whose life had gone off the rails, and she would say, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." Now, she meant it saying, I'm thanking God for my life. But on the other hand, it's pretty judgmental, isn't it? Thank God I'm not like that. I know she didn't mean that. She was a wonderful person. But there's a little bit of judgmentalism in all of us, a little bit of self-righteousness. The problem with that is it turns into arrogance. We become arrogant. Self-righteousness very easily slips into arrogance, and arrogance is